Christopher Walken has been working in the entertainment industry for pretty much all his life. His mother dragged him to his first photo shoot when he was just 14 months old. His career really started picking up steam, however, in the late 70s, when he was honored with an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in The Deer Hunter. Ever since, Walken has predominantly been cast in eccentric or dangerous roles. He's been called the quintessential character actor. That being said, judging by his interviews and public appearances, in real life he's anything but wild. He lives a quiet life in the countryside with his wife of more than 50 years. He doesn't even own a computer or a cell phone. As far as celebrities go, Walken is a bit of an enigma, but that's what makes him such a fascinating personality. He's been known to steal clothes from film sets. Speaking with The Independent in 2010, Walken nonchalantly admitted to stealing articles of clothing from movie sets he's worked on. He even showed up to that interview wearing a sports jacket he commandeered while on the set of the 1990 film The Comfort of Strangers. Reportedly, he's been doing this kind of thing for decades. While shooting Batman Returns, Walken fully intended on taking a bunch of clothes with him to add to his collection, but unfortunately the film's crew knew of his reputation and decided to take preemptive action. After filming wrapped on the last scene, Walken went back to his dressing room to discover everything was already gone. Christopher and his brothers were child performers. Christopher is the middle child of 3 boys of a family from Queens. His dad was a baker, while his mother was fascinated with show business. While they were young, she started taking her boys to open auditions for TV shows and commercials. Despite his early childhood success, Walken insists he was just simply following his friends. Back in the 50s, television started taking off, and there was a lot of interest in live shows from New York. They were a dime a dozen back then, and because of that, there were hundreds of kids from Queens, from normal working-class families, doing TV shows. According to Walken, in Queens, he and his friends didn't go bowling or catch a movie on Saturdays. They went to dance school instead. It was a very different time, but Walken lucked out. While so many of those other kids ended up having their careers fizzle out, he continued to find steady work while honing his craft and making a name for himself in the industry. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. And keep watching to learn why Walken refuses to own a computer or cell phone. He briefly worked as a lion tamer. Even though he was fortunate enough to have a head start acting, Walken experimented with other career paths as well. When he was 16, he spent a summer working as a lion tamer for a local circus. To be precise, he worked as a lion tamer's apprentice. There was a running joke the real lion tamer who owned the circus had a son even though he didn't. But Walken owned an identical outfit as his boss, so he filled in as the fictional son and did a big act with a dozen or so lions. At the end of the show, he'd come out with his whip and act like he was putting the oldest lion in her place, even though in reality she was actually super sweet. Walken described her as being more like a dog than anything, so the danger was minimal, but he got to add lion tamer to his resume. He almost played Han Solo in Star Wars. According to Walken, he was merely one of the hundreds of actors who either auditioned or were considered for the role. But according to the book How Star Wars Conquered the Universe, George Lucas considered Walken his second choice for the iconic role that went to Harrison Ford. Lucas was reportedly a bit reluctant to cast Ford in the role at first because he'd already used the actor previously in American Graffiti. And it's even rumored Lucas was still considering Walken for the role even after giving it to Ford. He refuses to own a computer or cell phone. In numerous interviews, Christopher has stated he doesn't own either a cell phone or computer. He's never sent an email nor a text and doesn't have any social media accounts. In 2020, he told late-night host Stephen Colbert that at times, while working on a film, the studio will give him a cell phone, but it's more so they can get a hold of him if they need to. Whenever he wants to use it, he has to have someone else dial it for him. The interview with Colbert took place during COVID, so it was conducted over Zoom. In the interview, Walken mentioned he had to have someone come over to his home to set up the digital connection since he hadn't the faintest idea how to do it himself. His real name is Ronald. To his closest friends and family members, he's Ronnie. So how did he end up being called Christopher? Well, he received his stage name from one of his old bosses, Monique Van Vuren. Walken worked as a dancer in her nightclub act alongside 2 other men in the early days of his career. Van Voren would introduce the performers using fake names, and one evening she started calling him Christopher. We're not sure why, but for some reason that was the name that stuck. He appeared in a Madonna music video. You've probably seen Walken's memorable performance in Fatboy Slim's Weapon of Choice music video. That was directed by Spike Jonze and was honored with several VMAs and even a Grammy. But it wasn't the only one he's done. In 1992, Walken appeared in the video for Madonna's Bad Girl, portraying the singer's guardian angel / slasher. His distinct manner of speaking is deliberate. Walken's signature way of speaking is one of his trademarks. Over the years, he's inspired many people to imitate it. But the actor insists he didn't adopt his unusual cadence for no good reason. Growing up in Queens, which was full of immigrant families, English was pretty much a second language. Being surrounded by so many different dialects and accents eventually led to him developing one of his own. He's not a fan of traveling. Some folks have wanderlust, but Christopher Walken isn't one of them. While his work frequently requires him to travel, he'd honestly prefer to stay home. While most celebrities either live in LA or New York, he lives in rural Connecticut. He's not the kind of person to embrace the hustle and bustle of city life. He told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch he can sometimes go weeks without seeing anyone. Some people might find that existence to be lonely, but not Walken. He hates air travel and even missed a screening for his 2012 film Seven Psychopaths because he didn't want to fly to London. He also dislikes driving, saying he instead prefers to be driven if he has a choice. He's not a fan of horses. Walken is self-admittedly a lousy horse rider. While filming Heaven's Gate, he had to ride a horse pretty much every day. The whole time, apparently, the horse never got to like him. Later on, when he portrayed Bond villain Max Zorin, the scenes that featured him racing on a horse were filmed by placing the actor on a stuffed horse that was pulled behind a truck. In Sleepy Hollow, he employed a similar tactic when he played the Headless Horseman. After informing the producers he had a fear of horses, he requested they'd provide him with a mechanical mount for his scenes. They ended up using the same prop horse that Elizabeth Taylor once used in her film National Velvet. He despises guns. Even though Walken has used a bunch of prop firearms in his films, he believes there are far too many guns in the real world. He mentioned in an interview with St. Louis Post-Dispatch that his friends who own guns often tell him they have to defend themselves in the event that someone breaks into their house. But in his opinion, what they're really saying is that they can't wait for somebody to break into their house so they can get a chance to use their weapons. It's this trigger-happy mentality he takes issue with, not necessarily the guns themselves. He was with Natalie Wood the night she died. On November 28, 1981, Christopher Walken, Natalie Wood, and her husband Robert Wagner set sail to Catalina aboard their yacht, the Splendor. The captain was Dennis Davern. At the time of their voyage, Walken and Wood were in the middle of shooting the film Brainstorm, which ended up being Wood's final movie. That evening, Walken and Wagner got into some kind of argument and Wood stormed off. Wagner assumed she had taken the yacht's dinghy out on the water, but when she failed to return, he called the harbor patrol. At 8 the following morning, Wood's body was found floating in the water. Rumors and speculation about what actually went down persist to the present day, and Walken doesn't like talking about it. But he has maintained the few times he's discussed it that her death was likely just an accident. In 2018, the case was reopened after being shut for decades. The LA County Police Department has since called Robert Wagner a person of interest. Now it's time to hear from you. What's your favorite Christopher Walken film? Let us know in the comments section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts Verse if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.